Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Sports Bazaar with me, Mick Malloy, and Titus O'Reilly, who has waded into the world of the SP Bookie and bringing us up to speed. What an engaging, entertaining little chapter in Australian sports history, and I'm guessing probably mirrored around the world, is it?
It was in different places, but, I think the reason this really resonates with you is you could have been an SP Bookie.
I would love to have been an SP Bookie.
So you would have been good at it, I reckon.
So basically, it was an attempt of prohibition for gambling.
Yep.
And like all forms of prohibition, didn't work. Everything went underground.
That's right.
But a seismic change when you left us had hit the world of SP Bookie, and that was introduction of the radio.
The radio.
And you foretold about the telephone.
The telephone.
But we haven't got
next.
there yet. So we're still in the middle of the Great Depression.
Yeah, the 30s. We left about mid-30s.
Which has really canonised the work of the SP Bookie. You've become bigger.
Huge.
Because of the trying times people find themselves in. Radio's on the scene, so now you can listen to a race in a pub. You don't have to be on track.
Yep.
And so the excitement generated by a horse running is mimicked all around Australia in live venues where SP Bookies exist.
Yep.
Bang!
And you get it paid straight out after the race because everyone knows who won. So correct weight is called. So this is every betting off track, every betting that wasn't happening at the racecourse is illegal at this point. Yeah. So in the mid-30s, they're trying to get a handle of how big SP bookmaking, because it only really started sort of started in 1907. They made it illegal, but then you ran into World War One, and so by the 20s is when it gets really established.
Yeah.
So as we're into the 30s now, the government of the day is trying to get a sense of how big this illegal industry is. How many SP bookies are there out there? No one really knows at this point.
Yeah.
So in South Australia, in 1933, they actually do a Royal Commission, and like I said, there are about 10 Royal Commissions, both federal and state, into gambling over the century, and 1,000 more other reports and inquiries, parliamentary inquiries and stuff. But the Royal Commission found that most of the evidence of off-course betting was just anecdotal. So no one had ever sat down and tried to actually tally up how many.
Hearsay.
So they decided, well, we better do it. We better find out, right, as part of what we're going to do.
Crunch the numbers.
So they sent a survey to every police station in South Australia to get them to report on the activity of the local area. Out of this survey, they said 15% of the public bet regularly with SP bookies. So that's like every week. It's a fair amount.
It's a fair amount.
They found that in South Australia alone, now for those overseas, South Australia is sort of the third biggest of the fourth biggest state.
Fourth biggest.
So
it oscillates between a metropolis and a giant country town.
Yeah, depending on the time of year, time of this is the 30s, but to give you an idea, so it's not a massive population there at the time, but still they found that they had 643 illegal bookmakers operating, which is a lot, right? That is a huge amount. 426 of them they discovered were based in hotels or pubs.
Sure.
29% of the time, the bookie was the person running the hotel. So only 30% of the time was it the publican. The rest of the time would be
taking charge of everything.
Yeah, but other times, 70% of the time was the pub owner would let someone operate out of there. Now they also found that if the Royal Commission found, if the pub didn't have an SP bookie in it, it attracted so few customers it was basically unviable.
Go with the flow.
So most hotels had to break the law and have offer illegal betting services, or they would go broke. So even the Royal Commission discovered this.
Get with the plan. And
said this, right? A Queensland Royal Commission 3 years later in 1936 produced very similar results. In Queensland, they had 749 illegal bookmakers they discovered, operating out of 205 hotels, 117 billiard rooms, 196 barber and tobacconist shops, and 156 in just other premises. Now, to give you an idea how big bookmaking was, in Julia Creek in Queensland, it's a tiny town. It's got a population in 1936 of 507 people.
Yes.
They found that they had 3 SP bookies.
Wow, that's...
there's no way they had 3 doctors in that town.
There's no one not betting in that town.
So this gives you a sense of just how big it really is. So other states found very similar things. They all had inquiries into this, all found very similar numbers. I won't go through them all because it's it's very similar. But sometimes it was quite funny how they found out.
Right.
So in one inquiry in Victoria, they sort of found out that on race days in Melbourne, in the city, in metropolitan Melbourne, so the suburbs as well, that there was an illegal bookmaker operating in close proximity to every hotel in Victoria. Yeah. Every single pub they found had an SP bookie either in it or right near it. 2 bookmakers are appearing before this inquiry, and the inquiry puts this to them. We put it to you that there's not a pub in this town or in this city that doesn't have an SP bookmaker. And the 2 bookmakers say, that's hyperbole, it's not that many. Right? And the Royal Commission says, you tell us, name some pubs then that don't have SP bookies. And they quite confidently go, well, there's this one and there's this one.
Yes.
So the Royal Commission sends police off to check these 2 pubs that these guys have swore there's never a bookie there, and in both of them they find bookies operating quite openly. So, like, even in the it's not even hidden, right? It's like
they've perjured themselves at a Royal Commission.
Yeah, well, apparently the police came back and said, no, and the 2 witnesses were shocked. Because even the SP bookies didn't know
they were operating.
How many were operating, right? It's this big. So the numbers getting so big because they've now got the radio and everyone comes in places, but suddenly you've gone from just one guy at the end of the bar to they might have to employ 6 to 8 people to record bets. And to take all the bets. And because suddenly if 100 people want to get on in the 20 minutes before the race, one guy's not going to be able to take all the bets. No. So they're doing this. They got runners who run around the pub and take the bets, or go out into the street and take the bets. On the front foot here. Yeah, they're doing all that sort of stuff. And so they're doing this. Occasionally police officers show up and that would be weird. Everyone go, what are you doing here? So the cops would avoid... When a race is about to start, they wouldn't go in because it's like, I don't want to have to arrest every single person in this town.
Sure.
So they find all these things. Now, in South Australia, their Royal Commission that identified how big this was, it made them think, well, what are we going to do to fix this? Yeah. And an idea was put forward, well, what if we set up legal totes that the government owns, off course? Now, this is shot down, but is a glimpse of what will happen 30 years later.
Yeah.
But it's shot down. Instead, South Australia we will license some bookmakers off course. So we'll let some of these SP bookies become legal.
That's a step in that direction.
And they set up what becomes infamous betting shops in South Australia. This is in the 30s. And there are 300 of them operating in 1936. And these become so notorious, worse than the illegal ones, because they allow betting on credit, which is never a good idea.
So they're licensed. So they're licensed.
So they're lending money to people to bet, and then they're sending standover men around.
Terrible.
To get it back. So the government are like, well, we've created a worse system than the illegal system. The SP one was controlled by the cops a bit, and it was a bit kind of regulated. Now we've made it sort of an official thing, and it's worse.
We can't control it.
So then the World War II breaks out, and the betting shops sort of go under, and South Australia just doesn't let them reopen after the war. They just subtly
the opportunity to
So once again, we're all one thing that came out of this though is around this time. They realise that women are becoming involved in hiding bets and taking bets.
Oh, of course.
Because they can put the bets, conceal them in their undergarments. And the police complained about this because when they tried to search them, they would scream hysterically. And they said this was unfair. It was dirty pool for women to get involved in this.
Fantastic.
So it was all doing this. Now, while this is all going on, so that gives you a sense of how big this is, right? Like, it's everywhere.
They can't control it.
It can't control it. Radio's the big one, but what happens next changes the way it's done, and that is the arrival of the telephone, right? So we kind of live in this world where you're 24/7 contactable on your mobile, but we're going from a period where there was no phones to suddenly you didn't have to wander down to the pub. You could ring someone and put the bet on. And the person you could ring didn't have to be in a pub. They could be anywhere, right? Sure. So suddenly phone betting explodes, and it's much like what the internet has done with betting. there's before the internet betting.
Yes. So would you have to have an account? Would you have to put money with the SP up front, or would you just pay on credit?
It was a combination of all those things. So usually someone would know that would start off, you'd know someone, you'd be accepted as a customer. Yeah. They would maybe offer you credit, or you would have an account with them. There was all those methods coming in, and it went from the very sophisticated to just one bloke in their house taking bets. So it varied widely. So this turned these SP bookies from small-time operators into a big business. This is where the image of the SP bookie in Australia is kind of like the bloke at the end of the pub with a half-full pot of beer, cigarette, form guide who would take your bet, right?
Now we've got a call centre.
Exactly, except it was in Australia. So
SPs today, you'd be ringing the Philippines.
Yeah. So the thing that this does is, one, people don't mind betting as much because you don't even have to leave your house, but also the chance of you being caught is a lot harder because you're not even physically at the place with the bookie.
They probably don't have the technology to put a trace on phones.
No, it's well...
understand.
Exactly.
This is unbelievable.
So a lot of people who before wouldn't be seen dead going down to the local pub and putting a bet on... Yeah. Because they were maybe very respected or rich, they could now just pick up the phone and ring someone. So the amount of money being gambled goes up.
It's the equivalent today of the sex shops. Remember when I believe that you used to have to go and physically go into a sex shop to buy some paraphernalia or some dirty books. Yeah. Whereas now you're online, and apparently the biggest surge is for women. Because you're at home, you're on your computer, you maintain your anonymity.
Oh,
I'll write that down.
I'm Googling. I'm Googling it right now. And just bear with me for 10 minutes while I just do some research.
But my point was...
Exactly.
It went boom because all of a sudden it was more discreet.
It was anonymous.
Anonymous, thank you very much.
Yeah, the anonymity is just huge all of a sudden. And so the amount of money being wagered, but also the amount of people being able to wager. So even women can do this a lot easier now. They can pick up and put a bet on the phone. We're going to a pub, full of 200 blokes. Yeah, they weren't even allowed in some of these pubs,
Wouldn't have an SP in the ladies' lounge?
Not really. And so this is this was an equality. Let the women get on as well. So this is all starting. So that's the first major change. So there's new people coming and booking. They can also, what they can do is they can ring and have someone on a phone at the race track and get real-time updates on the odds. So they can actually... They're still called SP bookies, but they're not just offering starting prices anymore. Because they can get real-time information through the radio and through the phone, they can actually start to work even with on-track bookies and work out how to set their own odds.
But they don't have mobile, so what phones are they using?
Well, there's public phones at the track. Yeah. And so they would do that. They'd have someone there who just would sit there getting on and ringing up every time.
That'd be a funny queue to be in.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so they would do that. They would also be able to take bigger amounts of bets because what they would often do is if they had a lot on one horse, they would put a bet on with another bookie on another horse to try and offset it.
Here we go.
So suddenly
it's the start of all the shenanigans.
Yeah, so suddenly they could do all that sort of stuff. They could lay off on another horse with another bookie.
Sure.
So suddenly you're getting it just increases.
Could you get the latest mail on a horse? You could go, this horse, I've seen it in the yard, it looks terrible.
Yeah, exactly. So suddenly you're getting real-time information, which is revolutionary. You got the radio, but then you also can have a spy at the place. You might have a few of them and they just keep coming back and ringing, so you're just sitting there taking calls while you have other people getting the info, setting the market while other people take the calls.
You just know that's going to cause trouble at the track. There'll be some bloke there who works for a big SP go and get off that phone. This is my phone.
Exactly.
You move right away. You get off, stop calling your nan.
Exactly. So what's now in place is you can put a bet on, much like now you can put a bet on your phone while you're in a meeting. The ease of it is just so easy. This changed it back then from having to either go to the track or find an SP bookie at the local pub. Suddenly you can listen on radio at home to the actual race and the odds, ring up your punter, ring up your bookie, put the bet on, listen to the result, and then bet all day on the phone without leaving your house.
Double up in the next.
Yeah. So this is what people are doing. So people are really happy with it. So it's huge.
This is the golden era.
Yeah. All this turnover becomes huge. You make a lot more money as a phone bookie suddenly than in a pub, because the volume of people who can call you, it's faster, it's quicker, and you can have multiple people on the phone and they don't have to physically move through. Sure. You're just on the phone and all this sort of stuff. So they'd be ringing all day. The scale of operation was huge. So they would someone would run a phone bank of people taking bets, then also have their own people sitting in pubs taking bets too. So suddenly got this sophisticated business with someone at the very top. To give you an idea, by 1958, street bookmakers took in £63 million, and that's on the street, that's in pubs and things like that. And telephone operating bettors in 1958 took in about £190 billion.
Jesus.
Now we're talking billions of dollars in today's thing, so this is a massive amount of money. Yeah. And so it's much better to be a phone bookie.
Okay.
One of the reasons is a Victorian Royal Commission found that a telephone operator could take 45 calls between each race. So they could get 45 people betting on, which is just a huge amount. And if you have like 10 phones all taking calls, it's a lot. Now, this seems to be a very accurate claim, because Mick Miller, who was a police officer who went on to become the Chief Commissioner of Police in Victoria, seen as the greatest of all time by many, he was part of the gaming squad. And he told the Royal Commission that during a raid, they raided a phone bookie.
Yes.
And the phones kept ringing, of course, because the phone people ringing in don't know
it's being raided.
That it's been raided. And Miller said he himself took about 30 calls in 5 minutes.
That's first-hand. That's boots on the ground.
Yeah, so he sat there taking the bets to just see.
Taking names and numbers? Yeah. Yes, what's your name?
Yeah, exactly. So he was doing that. So the telephone bookies suddenly got a lot of money, and they become more sophisticated than the average bookie. So one guy bought a whole block of flats.
Yes.
And so the top floor was set aside for his phone betting shop. So it was hard for the police to get there because there's no elevators. You'd have to climb all the stairs to get up there. So one of the police scaled the outside wall and got up there and found all the evidence. Wow. So the people were doing that. The problem this creates is if you're going to be a telephone bookie, the one thing you need is a phone, right? And hopefully many phones.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, well, how do you do that?
And you might need them quickly because you might need to move places occasionally, right? So this leads to even more corruption, where bookies start bribing employees of what was then the Postmaster General's Department, the PMG, which is later split into Telecom, which becomes Telstra, so the phone company in Australia, the major one, and Australia Post, the mail service, but it used to be under one. Right. So the Postmaster General's Department oversaw phones and mail back then, right? And so they would start to bribe the Postmaster General people to get more phones put in, right? And this becomes a huge thing. Police try and get the Postmaster General's Department to stop giving phones to criminals.
Yes.
And they had the power to cut any phone lines that PMG did if it was illegal. But the PMG didn't really want to do this. One, because they were all on the take.
Yeah.
They're all getting bribes.
Sure.
Secondly, they're making money and they're not the police and they don't really care. It's the police's job to tell them what's illegal. They don't. If you want 16 phones in your home, what are they to ask? They don't know why.
It's the model equivalent of being spammed. Like telecommunications companies have no interest in stopping it because they're getting paid.
They're getting paid.
Every time those messages get sent.
So the police are trying to do this, but the police keep finding phones installed in a way that they say suggests that the PMG staff totally knew what they were being using. In one instance, 8 phones were found installed under a flight of stairs.
Okay, that's suspicious.
Another saw 6 in a cubicle in a disused warehouse.
Oh, my antennas.
Your antennas go out. Once they raided a house and found 16 phones and phone lines in one room of a house.
Nothing to see here.
Nothing to see. I just like talking to people.
You never know if everyone rings at the same time.
It's a conference call. So this is all happening. Police keep finding when they raid Bookies, the numbers of PMG staff, numbers that you wouldn't find in the phone book, but like for area managers and all this in there, written down in their book. So every now and then the PMG would launch a crackdown to sort of make everyone go away for a little while.
To be seen to be doing
and then it would go away. And the PMG's heart just wasn't in it, right? They're not an enforcement body.
Yeah.
So Queensland Royal Commission said, on all these matters, the department, the PMG's action is dictated solely by the desire of revenue. It would be foolish to believe that any person would want a number of telephones or extensions in each premises, or that an illegal off-course bookmaker would require a silent line or extension for any reason other than to defeat the law. So they're just totally doing this. Now, to give you an idea how big this gets, and how much, you know how they always say the two things that drove internet technology is porn and gambling.
Sure.
So they were the first industries that like worked out how to take payments online and all this sort of stuff. So all the things that have followed since then are off the back of that. Betting phone calls basically drive the telephone industry in Australia in the early days. It's huge. This gives you a sense of how big it is. During World War II, John Curtin, who was the Prime Minister, is trying to get an outside line to ring a state premier to talk about the
matters of state,
how to defend against the Japanese invading. Right?
And he can't get through.
And he can't get an outside line. This is when he had to ring and say, operator, can I have an outside line? He's the Prime Minister. He's trying to ring a premier about stopping the Japanese invading. And the operator apologised when he lost it and said, I'm sorry, there's 60 SP betting calls waiting ahead of you. So would there be anything more Australian
Would you like to bet on the Japanese invading?
I'll take that.
We'll take that call.
But would there be anything more Australian than we did successfully get invaded by Japan because we couldn't organise the defence of the country because people were getting their bets on, right? Isn't that amazing?
It's incredible.
And it wasn't
it's believable.
There wasn't a rule of like, it's the Prime Minister, kick them off. It was like, no, they're all in the line.
Your call is important to us. You are the 14th caller in the queue.
So this is how big it is. It's just absolutely massive. So this has changed the whole face of it, right? This is like suddenly these are big enterprises, almost like criminal enterprises, rather with big money being made, not just your local. There's still the local SPs in some suburbs and some country towns, but more
relics of the past,
and they're increasingly becoming the relics of the past. So. One of the things that spreads up around this is because they're no longer offering the starting price on a horse and they're offering their own odds and they're competing with the on-track bookies, and the locals are also the on-ground ones competing with the telephone bookies. So there's all this competition going on now. What they do is they keep signing up to press agencies or wire services to get the very latest fluctuations of odds. And so this becomes a whole huge industry of people selling the information of racing stuff.
So it's another little sidebar.
Huge, it becomes a big thing. So these companies split up and pop up everywhere, and they will put out the results over the telegram or the phone, and you can subscribe to it, and they will ring you before each race and go, these are the current odds, and they might ring you 4 times before each race.
So that's for punters, not the bookmakers.
No, the bookmakers.
Oh, the bookmakers.
Big punters as well subscribe to it.
Can go,
but the bookmakers are getting
the latest up-to-date info.
Yep. So they are often illegal and sometimes legal depending on what state they're in. And
well, just giving information. They're not betting, are they?
So, there's some places that the government's trying base that you're not allowed to broadcast some of this information. But, they get around it. It's hard to pick, right? So they're doing all of this. They know the movement of the odds, so that's what people are signing up to. But what it does is, because you can sign up to these wire services or get phone information dialed through to you, a bookie in Queensland can suddenly take bets on races that are happening in Victoria or New South Wales. So for the first time ever, you've got a national booking market. Oh, my. So this is where it begins.
Is the radio broadcasting all these races from different states?
They start to also get into like going, well, why let the good times stop instead of having 8 races a day or we could do.
We're going to Adelaide.
We can go and bring you these races, right?
Oh, mate, this is the golden era.
This is the golden era. So in Western Australia in 1954, the Tate's Press and Telegram Agency serviced 231 bookmakers.
Yes.
There was another one, the Goldfields Press Agency, that did racing information on Kalgoorlie, Boulder and other districts around there. One of the largest services operated out of Queensland. It was run by a name called Charles Bonham. He was often called before Royal Commissions, like several times. He just went to Royal Commissions like you and I would go to a house party. Sure. Right? I was like, he owned the South Coast Press Agency. He had 34 people that he employed, all received information from across the country and then gave it on to their... So they were like an intelligence gathering organisation. They would then provide to their subscribers who paid £5 a week. So that's quite a few $100 in the modern. So you'd subscribe to that. And they'd provide information for Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne. He said in the 20 or so minutes before every race, a client might receive 2 or sometimes 3 calls telling them about the betting fluctuations.
This is insane.
So they would sit there. All this activity resulted in a phone bill for his company of more than £11,000 per year. So this is like hundreds of $1,000 phone bill he'd have.
So that would stick. That would be a red flag.
Yeah,
I would have thought.
Well, they sort of knew, and he said, "Well, I'm just providing it." Transparency to those legally betting on races. It's not my fault if once I give someone information, for all I know, they're off to the race course. I don't know that they're going to bet on the phone or at a pub. That's not what I'm worried about. That's your problem, right? So he was quite open about it, right? They had real
Don't
problems.
shoot the messenger.
Yeah, they tried to shut him down. The problem is he operated from a concrete bunker in the basement of a hotel. So they had trouble raiding it, and they could just change whenever they want. One place, which was in New South Wales, they had 2 major wire services. One was Telesports Limited. That had 100 telephones, and it ran up a $30,000 pound phone bill. And there was one called Eaton's Agency, which had 65 telephones and had similar amounts. So this was the sophisticated stuff that's all coming.
Yeah.
And what starts happening for the police is they're taking all these kickbacks.
Yes.
People start to say, where are the arrests? There's no arrests for illegal betting.
It seems unusual.
Yeah, so they come up with a way. The police come up with a workaround, another system of how to make it appear that they're doing their job. So what they happen is they're taking money. They know no one wants it. We talked about it last episode. They take bribes. The Australian public just love gambling. It's not going to stop. So the police say, we'll just take the bribes and not crack down on it. But the problem is, why aren't you arresting anyone? So they come up with ways to arrest people. So in 1930, the New South Wales police formed a special SP squad, and they would start to arrest people. They were told, you need to get results. So they do. They start to get results. It leads to 20,000 arrests in 6 years, from 1930 to 1936, right? Yes. But it turns out that most of the times they're being bribed. So they don't want to arrest the people that are being bribed. So it seems a lot of the time, to boost their arrest numbers, they just frame people who aren't betting. This is widespread.
Right.
Right? Because they don't want to arrest people actually bribing them, but they want to arrest people. So occasionally they would charge a real bookie, but that was usually a punishment for not paying a bribe. Or they'd arrest to work out to organise an arrest.
No one wants to stop this.
Yeah, they'd arrest someone working for a bookie rather than the person running it. Yeah. That was another one. So these sort of innovative practices of framing people or arresting lower down people, and they would take turns on it, is starting to get picked up in newspaper reports about police corruption and fabricated things. People are starting to get a bit worried about it. So it blows up on Saturday the 18th of November 1933 at lunchtime. So it's a Saturday lunchtime.
Yes.
A guy called William Moulds is a butcher, a local butcher. And at lunchtime, the police come in and they raid his butcher shop and they charge him of illegal betting activity. Which is
from the butcher shop?
Yeah, from the butcher shop.
Okay.
Now, this isn't this unique. You know, they're police are arresting lots of people at the moment. Mm-hmm. But once again, they're framing this guy. He's not an SP bookie.
But why are they picking on the butcher?
Because he's not paying them bribes and they just decided he was an easy mark. And this is widespread in Sydney especially. They're just framing people to get their arrest numbers up without touching the real bookies
they're not getting free meat.
Yeah, something like that. Now, the problem is William Moulds was not only someone who didn't gamble. He just loves selling meat to the community. He was a member of the Freemasons.
Okay.
And now the Freemasons, which is, this male group,
very powerful underground,
brotherhood.
Scientology.
They're a semi-religious order. And they were sort of came out of the stonemasons in medieval, very tenuous thing linked to that. But they were basically
powerful
a lodge.
people, captains of industry.
I've got a list of some ones.
Okay.
So in Australia, they had the first Prime Minister, Edmund Barton, was a Freemason. Weary Dunlop, famous war hero, was a... Robert Menzies, longest ever serving Prime Minister, was a Freemason.
Was he a Freemason while he was Prime Minister?
Yeah. Charles Kingsford Smith, the famous aviator. Jeez. Don Bradman was a Freemason. So Moulds was not only a Freemason, but he was highly involved in the local Masonic lodge. So these lodges where you
picked on the wrong guy.
Yeah. So he's well regarded. He's got no history of betting, let alone taking bets.
Yes.
He doesn't even bet. And so people just can't believe it, right? And the police have arrested him. They've charged him. They present lists of horses and betting odds that they find at the shop. And Moulds protests this. But despite protesting, the court says, well, there's all this evidence, and they fine him £20. Now, normally when people are framed by the police at this, they just go away. But Moulds is furious. So he appeals. And the fine's reduced to about £5, but the conviction stood, and he's still furious.
Not happy.
So he goes and starts insisting on saying this is a complete fabrication. The police planted those documents. This is nonsense. Now, other people are becoming troubled by this. So a guy called Charles Williams, who's also a Freemason,
yes,
he knows Moulds well, and he'd bailed him out. He's concerned. And he knew a Constable Miller, not the one we talked about before, who was one of the junior members of the raid. And he also happened to be a Freemason. And so Williams went and questioned Miller and said, what happened? And he said, it was a dodgy arrest. Yeah. He admitted. So they knew from the horse's mouth, this is not right. Yeah. So the Masonic network power kicks in. This is why you should always be a member of a shadowy organisation.
Join.
Williams then says, well, I've got Miller telling me it's a dodgy arrest. He goes to the Inspector Alex Russell, who's the head of the flying squad on gaming, who also is a Freemason, who launches a police inquiry, and that's headed by an Inspector George Ferguson, who, guess what, is also a Freemason. And they go and look into this, and they all deny it, but it clears the police at first, but it should have died. But then more Freemasons kind of kick in on this. And one guy, as a member for Marrickville, Carlo Lazzarini, he's a former police member. He gets up in Parliament and he talks on the back of this and says, every week after the race meetings on Wednesdays and Saturdays, the police deliberately, he's saying this in Parliament, deliberately frame men for starting price betting in order that they may get convictions to their credit. They set out from the police stations in their comfortable motor cars. They run the rounds of the hotels in the metropolitan area. And as they are fearful of going back to the station empty-handed, they pick out the most likely looking chap and apprehend him. It appears to me that quite irrespective of the evidence that is placed before the bench in these cases, the magistrate invariably convicts.
Wow.
So it is blown up, and he talks about the Moulds case and says this is an example of someone being framed who is completely innocent. Now, this blows up the thing. A Royal Commission...
another one.
Yeah, it's called the Markel Royal Commission by Justice Horace Francis Markel. He is told you got to do a Royal Commission. Now, he doesn't know this at the time, but he will, between 1936 and 1939, do 3 Royal Commissions into gambling, right? Because these are just like... Now, the first one, he unveils just how widespread the SP bookies are, and he starts to document all this police corruption. So it starts all coming. He finds all these ones of where the shops are raided, and what happens is police hire informers to tell them who's SP booking. The informers then go and plant betting slips on innocent people and then call the cops in, and the cops don't care that much and go, great.
Insane.
So it's an actual system set up to arrest people, right? And the police agents, the informers, they don't get money unless they dob in someone. So sometimes they've dobbed in all the SP bookies and they might all be paying bribes, so the police don't have anyone. So they have to go and find other people.
My head's hurting from all this.
Yeah, so they do all this sort of stuff, right? So this is all happening all the time. One guy called William Jennings, who's a sergeant from North Sydney, he appears in evidence again and again at this Royal Commission. So he explained that one guy, Alfred Ingram, who was an SP bookie, entered into an arrangement with Jennings where he'd pay him £20 per month, which was a lot of money, right?
Yep.
The bribes didn't make him immune from prosecution. What Jennings would do is he would arrange for when and how he got raided.
Okay.
So he would call up and say, we are going to be raiding you on Saturday in 2 weeks' time.
You've been warned.
And so Ingram said, I had to be caught in my turn. I could not have an exemption altogether. I had to go to court about once a month. Cochrane one of the guys was to ring me up and let me know when they were coming so that arrangements could be made. And I would ring back an appointed time when they could come so that I would be prepared for a couple of minutes before a race or a couple of minutes after the race. It was to be at a time which suited me best.
And then you'd have to, fade it? Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, coppers, you got me.
Yep. Now, what would happen
in this round...
What would happen
Unfortunately, there's not a lot of bets here. But
exactly. But what Ingram would then do is he knew the police were coming in, say, 2 weeks' time to arrest someone. So he would find someone with no previous convictions to stand in and be arrested. And then he would pay for them to be the fine, and he would pay them extra for their trouble. So it was all appointment booking of raids, right? So now, if they couldn't get someone without a criminal record, they couldn't find someone who'd agree to do it, didn't want to be arrested.
Yes.
What the police would say is, so say you had a criminal record and I said, Mick, I want to pay you to take this hit for me. And you said,
what am I getting from this?
And I'd say, I'll pay you money. And you go, great, I'm happy to do it. Now, I'd say the police, now the problem is Mick has a conviction for gambling already. And the police would say, this is what came in the Royal Commission. Don't worry, we just won't mention that in court. We'll tell the court he's a clean skin.
They pull the prize.
Yeah. So what happened in one is one of Ingram's clerks, Victor Hilton, was arrested in a pre-arranged raid. Right? They rang up and go, all right, arrest Victor on Saturday when you come in. They go, great. So they come in, they arrest Victor. Now, he'd been convicted 5 times already. And so he stood up in court and the prosecuting constables told the judge that Hilton had no previous convictions. And so ridiculous was this claim that the court burst out laughing. And the only person in the room...
the judge.
It was the judge who didn't know. Yeah. And so he was unaware, so he fined him just £1, even though he should have been found about £100 because he had no prior convictions.
Burst out laughing.
So it's totally corrupt.
How do you plead not guilty?
Yeah. So it's you can see the level of corruption, right?
But just the depth and the layers of bullshittery.
Yeah. It's all
so
workarounds.
Everyone can go about their business.
Yeah, all workarounds. And so this wasn't unique to New South Wales. In other parts of the country, what would happen is SP bookies would organise the arrest of homeless people and then they would pay the homeless people for their trouble.
So it's a win-win.
Yeah, it's better than how we currently manage homelessness.
Oh, absolutely. They get a reward.
So when the Markle's Royal Commission finally concluded and he delivered his report, he found that police had planted evidence, committed perjury and fabricated confessions. He had seen 250 witnesses, 83 police officers, 22 of which had charges held up against them. 16 officers, including 2 sergeants, lost their jobs. But to show you how small a drop that is in the ocean, he's back with his 2 more Royal Commissions in the next 2 years. So, that's all. And he just keeps finding more and more problem. The police try and come up with new ways to do it, but all that happens is people just constantly find out that there's ways around it, right? That we keep coming back to. They're just absolutely immune to them. So similar attempts in other states had the same outcome of trying to ban this. West Australia had a Royal Commission on betting in 1959 and found police informant and betting laws they described as sporadic at best. So they were so blatant in off-course betting, ignoring it. He said, seen in one town where bookmakers in Western Australia had their betting boards, wireless sets and umbrellas set up opposite the central portion of the main street with no prosecutions ever occurring. Like they're just set up in
plain sight.
Yeah, they found in Perth too that each bookmaker took their turn being charged and fined. Often it was for obstructing traffic because they would be set up on the sidewalk.
This is just an elaborate system of it's your turn to take one for the team.
Yeah. They would rarely offer a defence in court, and they would just put often a dummy or a stooge up to be offered up to be bet for it. And that was all the way it happened, right? So it was just constant, absolute thing. Now, Mick Miller, who was the guy who took the phone calls of 30 bets and becomes police commissioner eventually, he gets put in charge of the special duties gaming branch. So this is to look into all this.
This will fix it.
Well, he was the first to start going in. He worked out that this is, sort of in the late 50s, early 60s, $500 million is being waged every year through illegal bookings. And the illegal industry in Victoria alone employed 100,000 people.
Yeah.
Right, so it's a huge industry.
It's a big part of the economy.
Yeah, it's massive. So the squad looked at the police who were doing the work on wagering, and they found out that not one arrest had occurred despite 1,400 briefs being placed for betting offences, right? They said that Mick Miller found that when he invested the police, that police kept copies of identical statements, like that they could just sort of roll out again, complete with the same confession and transcripts of interviews, but with blanks for names and other details to be filled in later. They were designed...
It's like a form letter.
It was. The forms were designed to result in the lightest fines possible.
Yes.
They were written in such a way. So they were going to enormous trouble, the police, to not enforce the law, basically. So the Royal Commission that then looked at this in late 50s in Victoria, it found that all this was the problem. Inspector Healy, who worked for the Victorian Police and he worked for the gaming squad, he fronted this Royal Commission. And he created a sensation by estimating that about half the members of the gaming squad did a reasonable job, 20% were merely inefficient, and the remaining 30% were corrupt.
Wow.
He just said this openly in court, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's just an open scene. He also found that the cost of protection had escalated, with squad members being offered up to £21,000 to provide regular warnings of impending raids. So they're making huge amounts of money. Now, this 1958 Royal Commission in Victoria, finally, is the turning point and the death of the SP Bookie.
Right.
The start of the death of the SP Bookie. They realise at this point that all this illegal gambling that started back in 1906-07 can't be stopped.
You can't stamp it out.
It can't be stopped. They're missing out on all the tax revenue.
Oh, ding dong. Here we go.
And it doesn't work. And so the Victorians decide, if you can't beat them, join them. And the Royal Commission recommends that they set up things called government-owned totaliser agency boards, which they shorten to TABs.
Yes.
And this starts government-owned TAB betting shops.
And they clip the ticket
on the
way
and they
through,
clip the ticket.
And everyone lives happily
and
ever
that
after.
will massively curtail the SP Bookies. They do still hang around. We might tell that story at a later time. And they basically, the TABs, get the government back into the gambling system once again, and will take off around the country. Every state will set up a version of this, and it will kill off the SP Bookies and will become the dominant way people bet until the rise of a little thing called the internet. Where everything, the Wild West returns, and that's the story for another
day. And the mobile
day.
phone and all
and
that
then we're
stuff.
away again.
Can I just say, part of me is sad. Once you regulate, it was the Wild West, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was an intricate system, a sensitive ecosystem, but it worked. No one got hurt.
The
There
people
was
being
just some gambling
framed.
going on. There were some colourful pictures.
Well, you know what it's like, though? It is exactly like Prohibition, right? Where
Correct.
it starts off as mum and dad almost operators doing it pretty harmlessly. And then it ratchets up and ratchets up. And then by the time you get to the end, this is maybe a story we tell for another time, because we've sort of done the John Wren bit, now the SP Bookie. The next bits to go into is then in the 80s, and the 70s, once the TABs are in place and there's legal gambling, really all that's left in the illegal gambling stakes is the real crims, hardcore. And so we get into all of that sort of corruption and problems.
Yep.
And then you have the internet. The next one after that's the internet comes in and just blows up the entire world, not just... But the SP Bookies are one of the great things.
What a great time to be trying to place a bet.
Well, it's two things, right? It's the law of unintended consequences. So by banning something, that creates this whole
set off a chain of events now
that you could not foresee. Yeah. And is worse than what you had.
Yeah.
Like before that, you had just John Wren and a couple of other big players, like we talked about the other day with Pablo Escobar.
Yeah.
You cut the head off him, and you got 10 cartels, not one.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's what happened. And the other thing is, it also shows the ingenuity of people to keep doing what they want to do, regardless of what they're being told.
And when you come in and try and impose a law that does not have the support of the people, you're cooked.
You're cooked.
There's no willingness, there's no appetite from anyone to enforce this.
Yeah.
And they're off the chain.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Love it. Bring back the SP Bookie and bring back the 6 o'clock swill. Can we do another episode on the 6 o'clock swill?
We'll just create a 6 o'clock swill if you want. We just should set one up. It's really just how much can you drink in an hour.
Yeah, an hour. And then we'll just go back to normal.
I don't think it works if you can just know you can.
Was that the first happy hour?
Well, I think it was, yeah.
It was.
But then they'd turf everyone out on the street. That was the problem. Right?
Then you've got all kinds of hijinks going on. All right, that's another episode. We're going to do sport and the 6 o'clock swill.
Yes.
That was informative. SP Bookies, well done. Thanks for your service.